Mom chose my toxic stepsister over me and kicked me out, but years later, I'm engaged and his company dropped her husband's contract as a client. And now she's blaming me. I'm a 26-year-old woman engaged to my fiancé, Jeff, who's also 26. We met on a dating app 4 years ago and have been together ever since. Jeff is my soulmate, the one person who has never disappointed me. My life hasn't been easy. My parents split up when I was only 2 years old, and my dad never really bothered with me afterward. While he did pay child support, he never showed much interest in being a part of my life. My mom, who's 48, wasn't exactly a great mom either. She was more focused on her own interests than on raising me. I basically grew up with nannies and babysitters. When I got older, I realized my mom was more into her social life than being a parent. She was a freelance artist and made enough money, thanks to child support, to not worry about me much. Honestly, I think if it wasn't for the money, she would have kicked me out long ago. She never seemed attached to me and mostly just waited for me to grow up and leave her alone. When I was about 13, my mom started dating Matt, who was 50. He had a daughter my age named Jess. When they first came over, my mom stressed how important it was for me to behave well. It struck me because she'd never cared about that with my previous boyfriends. Normally, she just let me know guests were coming, and I'd hide in my room until they left. But this time, I sensed my mom was serious about this guy, Matt. Otherwise, she wouldn't have bothered about my behavior. It made me realize she wouldn't have even noticed me if she wasn't into him. When I first met Matt and Jess, they seemed nice, and the introduction went smoothly. Little did I know what was coming next. Matt started coming over more often, and it felt like they were practically moving in together. It didn't bother me much as long as they left me alone. I was fine with it. They became a regular presence, with Jess visiting occasionally as she split her time between her mom's and our place. At first, they either treated me okay or just ignored me, which suited me fine since I wasn't too fond of any of them. I didn't care much about my mom, so caring about people connected to her was hard. All I wanted was some peace and quiet, which I had for a while. Then they decided to move in together permanently. I wouldn't have minded, but my mom said I had to share my room with my stepsister now. I refused. That room was mine, always had been, and it was the only place I felt at peace. In that house, I had my own little corner, and I wasn't about to give up my freedom by sharing my room with someone I barely knew. When I told my mom I wasn't going to share, we had a huge argument. She threatened to kick me out if I didn't obey. I was only 14, but I knew my rights. I felt like I had to stand my ground because my mom wasn't exactly trustworthy. Plus, it just made sense. I knew she couldn't kick me out until I was an adult without getting in trouble. So I called her bluff and told her she couldn't do it. She was frustrated but had to give in and let me keep my room. Instead, she decided to transform the basement into Jess's room. It wasn't as nice as mine, but my mom worked hard to make it comfortable. When she was finished, it looked just as good as any other room in the house. So I didn't see why it was such a big deal. But that's when Jess started disliking me, and I think it had something to do with my mom announcing to everyone during the house tour that Jess had to live in the basement because I wasn't willing to share my room. I couldn't understand why she'd make such a public announcement. I still can't figure out why she did it. Maybe she wanted to make me feel guilty by announcing it in front of Jess. But it just made me uncomfortable. Or perhaps she enjoys drama and wanted Jess to know I refused to share my room, which caused tension between us because Jess didn't seem like the type to let things slide. My mom's prediction was right. Jess didn't let it go, and from that day on, she treated me like the enemy. Even though she spent half a month with her mom, the days she was with us were unbearable. She was constantly mean to me and made hurtful remarks right to my face. Let me paint a picture of the things she would say. Once, she suggested that my dad left my mom because of me, and then she laughed as if it were a joke. She'd also poke fun at my looks, especially because I was a bit chubby back then. At school, she had a group of mean girls, and she never missed a chance to join in on bullying me with them. Before, she and her friends would just ignore me, and I preferred that. We were never friends, but that was better than being enemies. What hurt the most was that I hadn't even done anything to her. She was just upset that I didn't want to share my room with her. It seemed like such a silly reason for her to hate me so much and make my life miserable. My room was my sanctuary, especially with a mom like mine. Who could blame me for wanting my own space? Besides, if any of them had bothered to get to know me, I might have considered sharing, but she was a stranger, and I wasn't comfortable sacrificing my privacy for her. I never complained to my mom or Matt because they knew and didn't care. They'd turn a blind eye to my struggles because I wasn't important to them. So I had to endure it and let her walk all over me. I try to stand up for myself sometimes, but it only made things worse. Our parents would intervene, and I'd end up getting grounded because, well, they favored her. She'd cry a bit and get away with it, but I couldn't fake tears like her, and I wasn't that manipulative. So I'd be the one punished while she got off easy, and I had to deal with it. Growing up there was awful, and I despised my life. When I was finally kicked out around my 18th birthday, I felt more relieved than anything else. I had endured my family's chaos for years, and it only got worse over time. Jess remained a nightmare to deal with, and our parents blindly supported her, no matter what. Over 4 years, she turned our entire high school year against me, and I was left with only a few friends who still talked to me. Everyone else despised me just because she did, and that was reason enough. It took a toll on my mental health, and I struggled in every aspect. I gained a lot of weight from binge eating, which worsened my appearance. I was overweight, battling acne, and my hair was a mess. On top of that, my grades were suffering, so not only did I look bad, but I also seemed unintelligent to everyone else. I had nothing going for me and hit rock bottom. Home life wasn't any better with Jess and my parents. My mom became increasingly unbearable, constantly comparing me to Jess, despite knowing she made my life worse. Things were bad before my mom married Matt and they moved in together, but they weren't this bad. It was disheartening that my mother didn't care about me before, but after she married Matt, things went from bad to worse. She went from being indifferent to actively making me feel terrible about myself. It felt like I was living with mean girls at home too. It was clear to me that Jess was the daughter my mother truly wanted, and I was just dealt the wrong cards. Both of them wished I'd disappear, and honestly, I wanted the same thing. My mother and Jess despised me, and Matt didn't care. With no other family besides my mother and no contact with my grandparents, I had nowhere to turn. I didn't feel right asking friends for help, so I toughed it out at home to at least have a roof over my head and food until I turned 18. But then, a couple of weeks before my birthday, something happened, and I was kicked out that same day. It was a weekend etched in my memory like it happened yesterday, one of the most traumatic and stressful days of my life. We had recently graduated, and Jess had started hanging out with a new, older crowd. She befriended someone whose brother, in his last year of college, became her boyfriend. They'd socialize with his friends, who were all older than us. I was aware of their activities but didn't dare tell my parents, fearing it would backfire. So I kept quiet about Jess drinking and likely smoking weed. I had no interest in those things. I was already struggling with weight and grades. I didn't need more trouble. But that day, I must have left my room unlocked before showering. Suddenly, I heard banging on the bathroom door, and my mother was screaming at me to come out immediately. I quickly dressed and rushed out to see what was going on. When I emerged from the shower, my mother, Matt, and Jess were waiting in my room, wearing serious expressions. My mother produced a bunch of empty beer bottles from under my bed, and even more damning, a large plastic baggie filled with what looked like grams of weed. I knew it wasn't mine, and so did Jess. But my parents didn't know that. Somehow, she must have planted it while I was away and then told my mom. They began yelling at me, accusing me of being a terrible person. It wasn't just about the alcohol and drugs. My mom also criticized me for being a disappointment and for eating all the food. She called me a waste, convinced I'd never amount to anything and would just keep living with them, wasting their money. I repeatedly tried to explain that none of it was mine, and I didn't know how it ended up in my room, but she wouldn't believe me. She got furious when I suggested Jess might have planted it to frame me. She yelled that I was always jealous of her and would never be as good at anything, which is why I was trying to shift the blame. I was in tears, but she didn't seem to care and kept yelling. Eventually, she stopped and told me I had to leave. I was baffled and asked her where I was supposed to go. She said she didn't care as long as I left because she was fed up with me. When I insisted I wasn't leaving, she threatened to call the cops and warned that at almost 18, they'd take drug charges seriously. She didn't want an addict in her house draining her resources. She said I had to fend for myself now because she was done pretending to be a happy family with someone who didn't deserve it. I begged her not to kick me out, knowing I had nowhere else to go and no money of my own. But she remained unmoved. She gave me until the end of the day to leave, or she'd call the police herself. I was stunned by her heartlessness, and even more so by the fact that neither Matt nor Jess objected. They acted like everything was normal. After a lot of tears and pleading, I reluctantly started packing my things. Between facing drug charges and living on the streets, I preferred the latter. By evening, I was finished packing. As I left the house, nobody said goodbye, and I didn't look back either. I spent a couple of hours at the park, but it got too cold, so I decided to go to a friend's place for the night, hoping they'd let me stay. I went to my best friend Amy's house and asked if I could stay for a few days. She already knew about my parents, so I didn't have to explain much. I shared the events of the day with her, and she was shocked. She suggested her parents could help if I let them. I'd always kept the way my parents treated me secret. Even from Amy's parents, unsure if anyone would believe me. I felt uncomfortable sharing such personal details of my life with others. That day, Amy insisted I tell her parents everything, and they were just as appalled as she was. They called my mother, trying to reason with her, but she was rude and unyielding. Realizing they couldn't change her mind, they did something incredibly kind. They offered to let me live with them for as long as I needed, promising their full support. They were well off, so money wasn't an issue, and Amy was willing to share her room with me because she cared about me. I spent the next few years living with them, attending community college since it was the only place I could get into with my grades. I worked and saved money to find my own place, but Amy's parents never pressured me to leave. They made sure I felt comfortable and supported. About 3 years ago, I finally saved enough to move out. I was proud of myself and deeply grateful to Amy and her parents. I couldn't have done it without them. Even on the day I moved out, Amy's parents helped me settle into my new place and assured me I was always welcome back to visit or even live with them again. It was a turning point in my life. By then, I had shed a lot of weight, improved my health, and felt much better overall. I was also earning enough to support myself and had spent a good amount of time working on myself. I decided to start dating because I eventually wanted to get married and needed to start looking. Before Jeff, I had met a few guys, but things never progressed far. When I met Jeff, everything clicked. I realized he was the one meant for me. He was funny, cute, and seemed genuinely interested in me. When we started dating, I didn't know he was wealthy or set to inherit his family's chain of restaurants. I just liked him for who he was. It was only after a few months that he shared his family background, and I learned about his future inheritance. Some might assume that learning about his wealth could alter things for me, but honestly, he remained the same person I knew all along. Knowing about his background didn't change my feelings, and I loved him just as deeply as before. After about a year of dating, we decided to move in together, and he introduced me to his family a few months prior. I got along well with everyone, and they all liked me. Everything seemed perfect, so when he proposed recently, saying yes was an easy decision. We've been engaged for 2 months now, and everything's been going wonderfully. Then, about 2 weeks ago, I received an email from Jess. We hadn't spoken in almost 8 years, and I hadn't heard from my family since I was kicked out. I was puzzled as to why she'd reach out now, especially to make amends. Enough time had passed, and neither of us seemed interested in fixing things. So when I read her email apologizing for everything and admitting she'd been awful, I was really confused. She confessed to orchestrating everything in my room because she simply loathed me for no apparent reason. It was baffling why she would confess to it years later, and I sensed something wasn't right about the situation. The timing was suspicious, especially since I had just gotten engaged, and she likely knew about it from social media or word of mouth. Given that we attended the same high school, I decided to investigate further. After some digging, I discovered that Jess's husband owned the business that supplied plastic containers for takeaway orders to Jeff's restaurants. It was relatively easy for me to gather this information by creating a fake profile and stalking her online. Her husband's bio mentioned his line of work, which aligned with what I already knew about Jeff's business plans. I immediately informed Jeff about the connection. In the past few years, I've made a conscious effort to distance myself from my old life, avoiding following any family members online and asking friends not to update me on their news. So I had no idea that Jess had gotten married until I discovered her husband's connection to our business dealings. Upon learning this, Jeff and I decided to terminate our contract with him. The costs were high, and more significantly, I couldn't bring myself to engage with Jess again. even on a professional level. Jeff also mentioned that the quality of the products from Jess's husband had deteriorated over time, and they were already considering switching suppliers. So last week, a few days after I received that email from Jess, Jeff held a meeting with her husband and ended their contract. However, Jess seems to believe that I orchestrated this to seek revenge on her. She's been accusing me of this through emails and social media posts, despite our lack of contact for almost a decade. While I might harbor some resentment, it's not the driving force behind her husband losing our contract. A few days ago, she posted on social media stating that many clients had been dropping them lately, and this was the final blow. However, she insisted that our decision was fueled solely by spite and labeled it highly unprofessional. She even tagged our Facebook page, creating quite a messy situation. While I can't deny there was a personal aspect to our decision, she also mentioned in her post that she and her husband had been losing clients consistently. While I feel somewhat remorseful, especially considering her struggles, I believe our decision was based on both personal and professional factors. I feel a bit guilty for influencing my fiancé to sever ties with my estranged stepsister's husband, Aita. Update: Jeff consulted with his dad's lawyers, who agree that our actions were justified. We've decided to pursue legal action against them, demanding the removal of their defamatory posts and pressing charges. The truth is, the products we were receiving were overpriced and subpar, so naturally, we sought better options elsewhere. It's purely coincidental that I'm married to the owner of that business. Instead of improving their services, she chose to tarnish our reputation on social media. It's absurd that I even felt sympathy for her given everything she put me through. Your support has helped me see things clearly, so thank you all for your comments and encouragement. Update 2. Jeff and his father initiated a defamation lawsuit against Jess and her husband a few days ago. We're scheduled to meet with a court-appointed mediator soon. Meanwhile, my mother has once again taken it upon herself to defend her stepdaughter. It feels like a high school drama, but thankfully, I can ignore them now without worrying about my living situation. Despite my mother's attempts to provoke me, I've chosen to block her and focus on my own life. I refuse to let their negativity affect me. I'm engaged to the man of my dreams, and I'm about to start a new chapter in my life. I have no room for them or their drama. Update 3. Quick update for you all. We won the defamation lawsuit thanks to the relentless efforts of my father-in-law's lawyers. They were able to swiftly resolve the matter, holding Jess and her husband accountable for their actions. Hopefully, this will prompt them to prioritize their business and meet their clients' expectations. With the legal battle behind us, Jeff and I can now shift our focus entirely to planning our wedding. I'm beyond excited to marry Jeff, my soulmate. I've waited so long to find someone like him, and now that I have, I'm holding on tight.